Molly Hollow is one of those deep, dark patches of ground between two high ridges on either side, bordered by the Barrens and the Clinch River. Molly Hollow is so dense with the canopy of hickory and cedar and oak and dogwood that there's parts of that hollow that the sunlight doesn't even reach the ground. Leaf litter has built up over decades, making the soil rich as rich can be. Perfect growing medium for anything that would grow in the shade, like ginseng. Ginseng has long been used in folk medicine, beginning in China and even coming to the United States. Thomas Jefferson traded in ginseng and listed it among the treasures of American plants. Not many people know, but Daniel Boone traded ginseng as well as furs. And Andy knew where the richest patch of ginseng was in Molly Hollow. Nobody went to Molly Hollow unless they had to. It was said that spirits were there from long ago Native Americans who traded and walked and trekked and hunted through there. Painters, bears, copperheads, all sorts of wild animals made their home in Molly Hollow. And you didn't go there unless you had a good reason. But Andy had a good reason. He knew that on the slopes in that deep leaf litter and with that closed canopy, that ginseng could flourish. And he knew where there was a patch of ginseng almost as far as you could see. Ginseng from almost the top of the ridge all the way to the floor. And he wanted it. Andy and Becky were newlyweds. Well, not exactly newlyweds. They'd been married a couple of years, but in their family, they were still considered the babies. They had a little cabin on the very edge of Becky's father's farm, and Andy worked with him trying to farm and looking forward to raising a family there one day. But he wanted to make some money. He needed to make some money because their little cabin was small and they were hoping to have children and they would need an addition to the cabin. And Andy had a dream that any child born in his house wouldn't be bartered with a chicken or potatoes or corn out of the garden. No, his children would be paid for. The doctor would be paid for in hard cash. And Andy knew where to get that hard cash, the ginseng in Molly Hollow. Well, Andy told Becky, it's early November, sweetheart, and I've got to go away for a few days. I know where the ginseng is. I know where it's perfect harvest time. I'm going to go. I'm going to dig it up. I'll bring it back. We'll dry it over the winter, and next spring, I'll take it to town and trade it, and we'll have us some cash. I'll be gone a few days, no more than a week. And as Andy walked out of their cabin and down the little path toward the woods, the last vision she had of him, he threw up his hand, and the sun winked off his silver wedding band. Oh, that wedding band. Oh, the stories of that wedding band. When she put it on Andy's finger, it was a family heirloom. It had been passed down in Andy's family from generation to generation. And how the ring even came to be was a story of itself. How Andy's family, many, many, many years ago, had traveled from Scotland to Ulster, Northern Ireland. And then from the famine in Ireland all the way to America, where the first person who set foot on American soil worked for a silversmith in Philadelphia. One day, the silversmith had tried to sell a ring to a customer, but he had a defect. A little chip right in the center of the ring that made Andy's ancestor think, that's a Scottish thistle. It was a defect. It wasn't meant to look like a Scottish thistle, but it looked well enough to Andy's ancestor that he bartered and got that silver ring. Passed it down to his oldest child, was passed down to the next oldest child, was passed down generation to generation. And the stories of the ring came along. While that ring was even brought back from King's Mountain when the wearer would not be coming home. It was passed down until finally Andy's father had passed it down to him, and Becky put it on Andy's finger at their wedding. Andy loved that ring. He cherished that ring almost as much as he cherished his wife. And the stories, he couldn't wait to tell any future children the stories of that ring and how it came to be. And when the sunlight flashed off of it, and Becky waved one last time, the woods swallowed Andy up. Well, Becky turned back to her work and thought, he'll be back in about a week. It was going to be a good time to do fall house cleaning. So she cleaned the cabin up, and day 3 had gone by. She began to cook up food for Andy's homecoming. Day 5 had gone by. By day 7, she was concerned, but not afraid. It had just been just a week. Perhaps he was even then on his way. By week 2, Andy had not come back. She still was concerned, getting a little afraid, so her father and brothers went into Molly Hollow and looked. No sign. No sign of Andy. No sign that he'd been digging. They found the ginseng patch that he had talked about and knew where he was going. No sign that even the first plant had been picked up. No knapsack. No clothing laid by the trail. No sign of anything. Maybe a bear had gotten him. Maybe a painter had carried him off. They took the news back to Becky. No, I would know. I would know in my heart of hearts if anything had happened to Andy. And I have no sign that he's not coming back. Not long after that, Becky confirmed what she'd been suspicious about. She was going to have a baby. And as the months went by and she grew larger, she kept watching for Andy. She knew he would be back. She would have a sign if he wasn't coming back, and she'd had no sign. She knew he would be back. One cold, dark night, a newborn's cry went through the cabin. Becky was exhausted. And she laid back on her pillow, and the midwife and the doctor there cleaned the baby up and placed him in her arms. Oh, he's a beautiful baby boy. He's perfect. He's just perfect. Well, she began to count his toes, and oh, they were 10 perfect pink toes. A little thatch of copper hair on top of his head, just like Andy had. His eyes, when he did open them, were the bluest of blue, just like Andy's. Oh, he was Andy made over. And as she began to count his perfect little fingers, his little wrist was so tight that she had to work to count 1, 2, 3, 4. And when she curled up the tiny, tiny little finger, she fell back with a sigh. For right there, clutched in her newborn's hand, was a silver wedding ring with a defect that looked just like a Scottish thistle.